So Malenia is one of the coolest boss concepts in Elden Ring. She simultaneously has some of the most devastating and most difficult to dodge attacks in the entire game, which is why many have tried making a build centered around the idea of role-playing as this boss. Well, today we're going to take a look at a build that does more than that and truly maximizes the heck out of her kit to reach truly remarkable attack ratings. So let's begin. Now, the build is obviously centered around the hand of Malenia, which has a few very cool tactical advantages. Since it's a katana, well, it's actually one of the best classes of weapons in the entire game, but it doesn't just stop there. Its running heavy attack is great at punishing enemies, especially in terms of PvP, with a very long reach stab that definitely punishes people who are not careful enough. Of course, since it's one of the lengthiest katanas in the game, it's also great at catching enemies from pretty far away, even the ones that tend to move quite a bit. Hint hint, yeah, boss encounters definitely become a little bit more easy with the regular attacks when you have this katana equipped. But most important, the weapon skill called Waterfowl Dance is what we're gonna focus on a lot throughout this video, because it's so great at stacking a lot of damage buffs that we're gonna totally abuse for this very idea. Now, this is what brings us to some of the other item choices that you have. Of course, the two most popular being the Rotten Winged Sword Insignia and the Millicent Prosthesis, which can no longer be acquired throughout one single playthrough, but you actually have to start a second one and choose the opposite of whatever you chose in the Millicent questline in your previous playthrough to get both of them. Now, I've been running a few tests, and of course we're gonna focus a bit on the Rotten Winged Sword Insignia on the first one, simply because, well, all of them work pretty much the same, with some small differences in the sense that they all have about 3 stages of damage boost on the number of attacks that you're performing. So in the case of the Rotten Winged Sword Insignia, it takes no more than 3 hits for the first stage to pop and give you a 6% damage buff, in this case from 600 all the way up to 636. The second stage takes roughly 1 to 2 more hits after the first one, giving you an 8% damage buff on top of the first one. And finally, there's another 1 to 2 more hits after the second stage, giving you a total between 13 to 15% damage buff, in this case from 600 to 687. A good thing to note is that the first stage of damage buff can activate faster with fewer and fewer hits after the first time you have fought a target, provided that you don't wait for too long. So for example, if you already activated its first stage in the 3 hits required and then took a break, the next time you need to activate the first stage, it only takes 2 hits and then only 1 hit, making it easier in prolonged fights to build these stacks up and give yourself a ton more damage. The same goes with the Millicent Prosthetic. The only difference is the fact that, well, this one gives you a 5 in stamina. The buffs seem to also linger significantly longer compared to the Rotten Winged Sword Insignia, but they do appear to be a couple of percentage lower in terms of the bonus damage per stack. In this case, about 4, 6, and finally 11 per each of the stages. The good news is that both of these talismans stack with one another, so you can get both of their bonuses at the same time. The bad news is that that only adds up to about 25 to 30%, which can seem quite high, but not high enough with the weapon that we have, and definitely nowhere near to the 1700 AR that we had at the beginning of the video, which was almost 3 times of our default attack rating that we have. So how do we make it to reach to that level? Well, here is one of the cogs in the wheel, and that's going to be the Thorny Cracked Tear, something that you get from the Minor Earth Tree mini-boss in the Consecrated Snowfields right here next to Ordina. Basically, this is the highest level version of whatever these talismans are trying to achieve, in the sense that its duration is a whole 3 minutes once you activate the Physic Potion, and the damage increase for consecutive attacks is much bigger even than the next best one, which would be the Rotten Winged Sword. In this case, for the third and final stage of consecutive attacks, it gives you a whole 20% damage boost right there. Of course, from this point on, it's just a matter of having a couple more buffs. This is a high dexterity build that uses about 70 points into dexterity at 125, but still has plenty enough points to also reach about 35 into faith, giving us plenty of options to buff our characters up and also get some protection in the mix. So a dexterity knot crystal tier also helps with the remaining 10 points to reach the cap of 80 for dexterity, and then we have flame grant strength and the golden vow to buff our damage for the final bit. And this is basically what you need to do, and in only one waterfowl attack you will reach 1700 damage with the Hand of Malenia, which is significantly higher than anything it can do at its default rating. This pretty much puts it on par with some of the heaviest weapons in Elden Ring, except it is much faster and doesn't really have any weight drawbacks. Now, in terms of, well, strategy, it's actually pretty straightforward. I'm pretty sure you can just one-shot almost any regular enemy with a waterfowl dance. Even if there's groups of enemies, the more the merrier, because it just means you stack so much damage and pretty much everything dies. Even more so if they try to encircle you, you kind of deal damage almost all around your character with very small little gaps over there for them to squeeze in, which means, well, they just fall off at your feet. Against bosses, well, it does require a bit of attention and you do need to know a bit of the boss strategy, but it's totally worth it and definitely satisfying to pull off a waterfowl dance at the right moment, especially if you kinda already know the boss fights by heart, if you already have hundreds of hours of playthroughs. Yeah, this is definitely something really cool to pull off. Its biggest advantage is definitely noticeable against enemies with large hitboxes that also tend to be a little bit more sluggish, including of course the Elden beast. At the start of the fight, you get enough room to even deal up to 50% of its damage in a few quick dances, ensuring that the rest of the fight just goes in smoothly and you can quickly finish off the entire game without much hassle. Heck, even going against some of the tougher bosses like KhrazeGaming, which, well, after so much fighting, I found him to be so easy. You can pretty much go in full on with almost no hit whatsoever, but in that case you're relying a little bit more on your regular and heavy attacks rather than the weapon skill itself. Still plenty enough room to even pop off a few of them during the fight if you know the attack patterns properly, and once you do it, it definitely slashes off huge chunks of its HP. Against literally everybody else, it kinda depends, but many of the bosses even get to skip many of their attacks because they simply get melted by the time they even get to deal damage on you, assuming that you're not super unlucky and get smacked in the face. Now, in PvP, it's a slightly different story, but not too much, since this is a katana. It's also amazing at punishing people, especially the ones that tend to be a little bit more hasty, because your running R2 is your best friend in this case, punishing people from very far away, especially when they charge towards you or are playing a little bit more aggressively. Its jump overhead attack is also amazing at doing damage and interrupting foes, and you can totally take people by surprise still, even with a weapon skill, when they are within range. It's not gonna be as hard to dodge as Malenia's own version, but if you pull it off, it's definitely going to one-shot people under the right circumstances, even if you don't fully buff yourself. But anyway, this is pretty much it with the build. Totally let me know down below how it works out for you, and I'll see you guys in the next video.